Have you ever wondered how a F-150 body is removed? If you have, stick around because I'm going to show you exactly how it's done. What is going on, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here and you have absolutely no idea who I am, my name is Mason. I am a senior master tech with Ford, and I work here at the dealership repairing just about anything that can tear up. Now that all of our introductions are out of the way, I want to say that you guys have absolutely blew me up about making this video. I have had probably hundreds of requests to make this video, and I really don't understand why. I don't understand the huge intrigue for removing cabs, especially if you don't have a lift, because if you don't, you'll never be able to use this info. Either way, I'm not going to question the masses. If this is what you want, then so be it, you will get it. In this video, I want to cover a few topics. First and foremost, this is going to be a step-by-step guide of how to remove a F-150 cab. This is going to be a bit generic for F-150 just because they changed so much over the years, but this pretty much applies to all of the F-150s from 2011 up, with just a few differences between the two body style changes and engine changes that they've made. The truck that you're going to see in this video is a 2016 F-150. So the second topic I want to cover is how long does it actually take an experienced technician to remove a F-150 body. Last but not least, I also want to cover a few tips and tricks that I've learned over the years to make this cab removal go a little bit smoother. I've had to learn the hard way about a lot of these. So the first step you're going to want to take in removing this cab is a real simple one. The first step is going to be to lock the steering wheel for the removal of the steering shaft later on in this video, but we're going to go ahead and lock it now. That way we don't forget and the steering wheel spins and messes up that $300 clock spring. Now it's time to drain the coolant. This can be done by removing the radiator drain cock. It is located on the passenger side of the radiator. I have actually found out over the years that it is actually about 100 times easier to just go on and remove the lower radiator hose because that drain cock is in such a difficult place to get to. Okay, Mr. EPA, next we need to recover the refrigerant out of this truck. This can be done by using a recovery machine like a Robin-Air AC recovery machine, or by disconnecting any AC line. Please don't do what I just said. That was 100% a joke. Use a recovery machine. That's definitely the best method. Next step is to remove the battery and all cables associated with the battery right there around the battery box. This can vary a lot based on the year model, so you want to just make sure that you freed all of the cables off of the battery box, because in the next step we're going to be removing that. All right, so you probably guessed what the next step is. We're going to remove the battery box. There's 4 bolts that hold this battery box in. Next up, we're going to remove the 3 power distribution wires that run over to the fuse box that sits behind the battery. This is model dependent. I believe this only started in 2015 or 2016, whenever they changed the body styles to the newer body style. I'm pretty sure that was 15. So next we're going to remove the PCM connector and the harness, the PCM connector harness that feeds the engine, and we're going to basically just fold that up and over the top of the engine cover. Next step, we're going to remove the air cleaner and outlet pipe. This is the big Y pipe and top of the air filter box. Next thing to do is to disconnect the AC pressure transducer electrical connector. After that, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the Inlet AC line. This is located right beside the battery box. Now that we've got that inlet line unhooked, we're going to go ahead and get the outlet line. This is located on the condenser. There's a small hole you can stick your hand through to get in there and disconnect that. Once you disconnect it, you're going to go ahead and pull it through beside the radiator. That way the line can clear the radiator support whenever the cab's going up. Small tip here, you definitely going to want to tape up those AC line holes with some masking tape or something similar. That way debris cannot enter into those AC lines. Next up, we're going to disconnect the charged air cooler electrical connector. This is the tube that runs up to the throttle body. After we've done that, we're going to go ahead and disconnect the body ground strap that runs from the cylinder head up to the body over on the driver's side. So after we've done that, we're going to go ahead and disconnect all of the connectors on the driver's side of the vehicle. These connectors are located up on top of the fender well, and they vary a little bit based on the year model. Usually there's somewhere in the range of 3 to 4. So we're going to go ahead and unplug them and try to push them over out of the way. If you have a Yeehaw 4-wheel drive truck, you're going to go ahead ahead and need to unplug the solenoid connector and unplug the 2 vacuum lines that run to that solenoid that are connected to the engine. Next up, we're going to unbolt the master cylinder and position it aside. Be very careful not to kink the lines or flip that master cylinder upside down. If you flip it upside down, it could potentially get air into the brake system, then you have to bleed the brakes after you get done. Next up, we're going to disconnect the brake booster vacuum hose. This is a large hose located on the bottom side of the brake booster. It's usually located right up under the master cylinder, so go ahead and unhook that. After that, let's go ahead and get our wheel speed sensor connectors unplugged. You might have already unplugged these whenever you was messing with the harness on both sides a while ago, but if you haven't, make sure that you have both of them unplugged and routed in a way that they won't get caught on the body as it goes up. Still on the topic of ABS, let's go ahead and unplug the ABS module. This is located right down on the driver's side beside the lower radiator hose. So this next step is only going to apply to the old body style trucks, I believe 2011 to 2014. We're going to want to go ahead and we're going to disconnect the fog lamps. There's going to be a connector on the underside of the bumper on both sides. Go ahead and unplug that, and we're also going to want to get the blow-off valve located on the driver's side of the charged air cooler. That is only on older models, and newer models you do not have to do that. On the newer models, there is actually a connector located on the passenger side. As you pick the body up, you'll be able to access it a lot better. It sits right up under the bottom of the radiator. This is for your bumper, your fog lights and your bumper, and everything that's located in that bumper. Please don't forget that. It will rip if you pick the cab up without unplugging it. Ask me how I know. Next up, let's go ahead and remove the steering shaft bolt. This is located on the driver's side. It is usually either a 10mm or a 13mm. So undo that bolt and go ahead and separate your steering shaft. Just be careful not to rotate that steering wheel. If you've done the first step in this video, you won't have any issues because you locked the steering wheel down. So next, we're going to want to disconnect the 2 degas bottle hoses. For the newer models, the degas bottle sits up on the fan shroud. We're going to want to go ahead and disconnect the one that runs over to the engine and the bottom coolant line that runs to the bottom of the degas bottle for the supply to the engine. On the older models, you're actually going to have to remove the entire coolant reservoir, which we'll get to later. After you've done that, let's go ahead and unhook both of our heater hose connectors. These are located on the passenger side going into the firewall. They can be very tricky, but take your time, blow them out if you need to with some compressed air, and shove them in real hard to clip the connector so that you can unhook them. After we've done that, we're going to go ahead and unhook the upper radiator hose from the radiator and position it aside. So I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but you are going to have to get the air box out on both of these. On the 2011-2014 models, the coolant reservoir is made into that, so just undo the 2 lines that you have to do, actually 3 lines on the older models. From the degas bottle, take the 1 bolt out and pull that box up. On the newer models, the air filter box does not have the degas bottle attached to it, so you pretty much just have to take the 1 bolt out, pick up, and it'll pop right off. All right, so now it's time to get up underneath the vehicle. If you have a lift, this would be the time to use it. Actually, if you don't have a lift, you probably don't want to attempt to remove this cab. I don't know how you would do it. Maybe a tree branch come along. I don't want to give you guys any ideas, but it probably could work. Run it in maybe through the windows on the front and the back and pick it up, something like that. Go ahead and get that vehicle in the air and remove. The first thing we're going to remove is the underbody shield. This is the same shield you will remove when you are changing your oil. If you have a 6-speed transmission, you will need to unhook the 2 transmission lines located at the front of the vehicle. Your transmission cooler is bolted to the frame. If you look up towards the front where the bumper is, you will see these 2 lines. This does require a special tool to disconnect those lines, which I will link down in the description if you guys want to go check that out. 10-speed owners, you guys do not need to worry about that step. Next up, we're going to go ahead and disconnect our shifter linkage. Please don't go to janking with the adjuster. Literally just take a screwdriver and pop it off. You're not going to break it. I do this every single day. You don't have to touch the adjuster. If you touch the adjuster, you're probably just going to jank up your steering cable. And when you get done, your shifter cable, when you get done, you're going to have some issues trying to get in reverse and drive. So just pop it off, people. And there's 2 10 or 2 13mm bolts that attach that to the side of the transmission case. So go ahead and remove that, position it over to the side where it can go up with the cab when we pick it up. Next, we're going to remove the ground strap on the passenger side. This is located right beside the second cab mount on the passenger side. Right behind it, there's a small ground strap. Go ahead and unhook that so you don't rip it apart as you pick the body up. If you have an electronic parking brake, ignore this step. If you have a manual parking brake, you are either going to need this special tool, which I will link down in the description, or some vice grips and a bunch of damn elbow grease to get this cable apart. Before trying to use that tool, go ahead and pull that parking brake cable out where you can get as much slack as possible. I usually do this by clamping down the cable with some vice grips after I pull it out. That way I have a bunch of slack in the cable and I can use that special tool to just go ahead and disconnect that cable. On the newer model trucks, you're going to need, actually when I say newer model, I mean 2017 up, you're going to need to disconnect the Evap canister vent hose. All you'll have to do, you'll see this hose, it runs up to the underside of the body. You're just going to need to unplug this from the Evap canister. The Evap canister is located on the frame rail right in front of the fuel tank, driver's side, right beside the transfer case. Lastly, we have to remove the cab bolts, which can be a hell of a lot harder than I just made it sound. The lovely engineers at Ford, for some reason, decided that each cab bolt needs approximately 1 gallon of Loctite on it. So that is the reason why these cab bolts never want to come out. Sometimes using something like a mini inductor to heat that bolt up and break down the Loctite a little bit will aid in helping remove those cab bolts. So also I want to mention, I only remove the cab bolts on the front bolt, on the front mounts and the back mounts, on the two in the center for you 4-door truck guys. I only remove the two 15mm nuts beside the cab bolt. That way, in case that cage nut spins, I don't have issues, because those two nuts, they always come off, and sometimes those big bolts won't come out. So I would highly recommend removing the nuts on those two mounts as opposed to the big bolt. So before you pick this cab up, you for sure want to double check yourself up top. Make sure you have everything routed nice and tight into the engine so the cab will come up without catching anything. Make sure that you have everything unhooked, disconnected that needs to be unhooked, this attached to the body, that attaches to the frame. Those are the only things you're going to need to remove. So just make sure, double check, triple check, quadruple check if you have to, because you don't want to start ripping connectors off as you come up with this cab. So pretty much all that is left is to position the lift arms under the pinch weld on the side of the body. I usually do this in the very, very front and the very, very back. Be very, very careful when you're coming off of the cab, you know, the first 6 to 8 inches. Make sure you walk around the truck and you're double checking to make sure that nothing, it has tension on it, nothing is being pulled, because you can pull connectors off. Believe me, I have done it. I have had those bad Mondays or want to get out of here Fridays, and I just, I missed something. So make sure that you're double checking yourself as the cab comes up those first 6 to 8 inches. After that, you don't have to check as much, because anything that would have been ripped out is already going to be ripped out after you come up 8 inches with that cab. So one thing I forgot to mention on the newer trucks, and I think on the older trucks too, when you come up those first 5 or 6 inches, there's going to be some push pins in the front that you're going to need to disconnect that attach from the grill radiator area to the bumper. There's like 3 of them. I know on the newer ones, like the 2017 ups, I know those are like that. So make sure you pop those push pins out. If you don't, it's just going to rip them out. It's not that big of a deal. It's not, detrimental to the function of the truck, but just go on and remove them. Pick the cab up a little bit and you can pop them right out. All right guys, so at this point you have successfully removed a F-150 cab. Give yourself a good round of applause, pat on the back, whatever you got to do to make yourself feel better. All right, so now the real question: how long does this actually take me to do? To answer that, I actually timed myself on a few of these when I wasn't stopping to record all this footage for you guys, just to see about approximately how long it took me. What I came up with is that it took me approximately 1 hour to an hour and a half to remove this cab, get it completely up to the point where you see it at now, just depending on what kind of working mood I was in. Some days I just ain't feeling it. All right, so a few extra tips that I can give you about removing this cab that I've learned over the years from trial and error. First one's a pretty simple one. Spray that parking brake cable with some penetrating oil before trying to remove it. This will help you a ton in, especially if you don't have that tool and you're just trying to pull it apart with vice grips. You probably won't ever get it apart without putting some penetrating oil on it. So if the front cage nuts spin, and when I say cage nut, the nut that the cab bolt goes into is actually encased in a little cage that holds that nut in place so that it won't spin as you try to remove it. Sometimes they will spin, and basically as you're trying to remove the bolt, the nut's just sitting up top, just spinning round and round and round with it, so it won't come out. If that happens on the front two cab bolts, what you can actually do is remove the headlights, especially on the older models. Now the newer models are a lot more difficult to remove the headlights, but on the older ones, you can pop the headlights out and you can actually go right down into where that cage nut is with a torch. Just be very careful not to hit the radiator. When you go in with that torch, if you heat that cage nut up enough where the Loctite loosens up, that bolt 99.9% of the time will spin right out. So third tip, if you didn't already notice in the video, as you're tucking the harness, the AC lines, the radiator hose, I know it's a really tight fit over on the passenger side. What you can do is you tuck all of that stuff behind the CAC tube for the turbo on that side. It's the big tube that loops over to your air intake Y off your air box. You can use that tube, just be careful not to pull out on it too much because you don't want to break the nipple that holds that in place into the little mount. But you can tuck the harness, the AC lines, the upper radiator hose, you can tuck all that in behind that and it will hold it out of the way so the cab can come up. My last tip for you guys, and this is one that I've kind of learned a little bit, if you remove the running boards, you can do it without removing them. You can get to the pinch wells as you've seen on this truck that I just did. I did not remove them because they're amp research and I wasn't janking with that stuff. If you remove them, especially if they're just regular factory running boards, there's only about 6 nuts that hold those on, 6 or 8, I don't remember how many it is, but you can take them off in about 5-10 minutes. If you remove those, it will help you a lot in keeping the arms of the lift in the right position so that the cab doesn't shift as you're coming up, because if it shifts, what you're gonna have to do as you come back down is you're basically just gonna have to fight those lift arms to get everything lined back up where you need it to get the cab to set back down into the holes. That's about everything you need to know to remove a F-150 cab. I hope this video at least gave you a better understanding of all the necessary steps that it takes to get that cab up and out of the way for all your engine repairs. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. That really helps to push this content, I can't even talk anymore. It really helps to push this content out to other people just like you. If you haven't already, I don't know what else I need to do to make you subscribe to this channel, so just go hit the red button. Lastly, I want to hear your thoughts about what you thought about this video and other topics you would like to see me cover. So hit me up down in the comments. I will do my very best to respond to each and every one of them. Also, make sure that you check out the links in the description I mentioned. You might like some of those tools I have down there. And check out my other socials. I try to be as active as I can on Facebook and Instagram, so check all that out down in the description. So that's going to be it for this video. I really appreciate you guys watching, and I will catch y'all in the next one. Peace.